Chapter 19, Section 3, Rising Labor Tensions. Like many workers after World War I, Sacco and Vanzetti were union men. Sacco and his wife Rosina acted in plays to raise money for striking workers. Vanzetti helped organize a strike at the Plymouth Cordage Company, where he worked as a rope maker. He urged immigrant groups to support labor unions. The dedication of the two men to the union movement was one reason working-class communities later raised money for their legal defense. Businesses returned to pre-war labor practices. After World War I, workers struggled to keep the gains they had made during the war years. As the war raged, the federal government had encouraged business and labor to cooperate. The National War Labor Board had settled labor disputes on generous terms to keep factories humming. Wages went up as the number of unemployed workers decreased and unions gained more clout. After the war, however, the government stepped aside, and the struggle between business and labor over wages and working conditions resumed. Corporations fought unionization. They reduced wages and paid less attention to employee safety. Some businesses tried to increase the workday to 12 hours, whereas 8 hours had been typical during the war. Workers respond by organizing and striking. Working-class Americans reacted to deteriorating working conditions in several ways. Many joined unions for the first time. At this time, the American Federation of Labor, AFL, dominated the union movement. The AFL was a group of unions representing skilled workers, such as machinists or mechanics, organized by their craft. The AFL was best known for bread-and-butter unionism. It's concentrated on improving wages and working conditions for its union members. In contrast, the more radical industrial workers of the world, IWW, whose members were known as the Wobblies, saw socialism as a solution to workers' problems. According to the preamble of the IWW Constitution, there can be no peace so long as hunger and want are found among millions of working people, and the few, who make up the employing class, have all the good things of life. The goal of the IWW, proclaimed its leader Bill Haywood, was to put the working class in control of the machinery of production and distribution, without regard to the capitalist masters. In 1919, unions staged more than 3,600 strikes across the country, creating the greatest wave of labor unrest in the nation's history. 1 out of every 10 workers walked off the job at some point during that year. The most dramatic strike took place in Seattle, Washington, when 35,000 shipyard workers were refused a wage increase. The Seattle-centered Labor Council called on all city workers to walk off their jobs. Approximately 100,000 people joined Seattle's general strike, a strike by workers in all industries in a region. The strike paralyzed the city. Nearly all economic activity came to a halt. Mayor Ole Henson condemned the walkout as an attempted revolution and called in federal troops to take control of the city. As fears of chaos mounted, Seattle's middle class turned against the workers. After 5 days, the unions were forced to call off their strike. The most controversial strike of 1919 involved the Boston police force. The police walked off the job after city officials cut their wages and refused to negotiate with their union. At first, Boston citizens felt sympathy for the police, but that sympathy vanished as the city lapsed into anarchy. Residents set up citizen patrols to fight rising crime. Governor Calvin Coolidge called in National Guard troops to keep order. In his view, there is no right to strike against the public safety by anybody, anywhere, anytime. He fired the striking policemen and hired new ones. His firm stand made Coolidge a national hero. The next year, the Republican Party nominated him as its candidate for vice president. Unions lose public support and membership. As the strikes persisted, middle-class Americans began to view unionism as a threat to their way of life. Strike-related violence added to fears that radical union activity could lead to anarchy. Public hostility was one reason that overall union membership declined in the 1920s. A second was the failure of many strikes to achieve workers' goals. A third reason was the exclusive politics of many unions. The AFL, for example, limited its membership by refusing to organize unskilled employees. It also excluded women, African Americans, and most immigrants. In response, African Americans organized their own unions. The best known, the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, was a union of black railroad workers led by A. Philip Randolph. In addition, a number of Supreme Court decisions weakened unions. First, the court restricted unions' rights to boycott a business that fought unionization. Then, in 1922, the court declared unconstitutional a federal child labor law. A year later, the court rejected a Washington, D.C. law that established a minimum wage for women workers. These decisions hurt labor unions by making it easier for companies to hire children and women at low wages. The diminishing power of unions had a negative effect on workers. Even after the post-war recession had ended, many working-class Americans gained little economic ground. Their average income remained well below $1,500 per year at a time when families needed more than that to get by.